I was going to ask you, have you ever seen a ghost?
Ooh, I felt one night. Yeah.
You did see a ghost on one night?
No, I've never seen a ghost. I felt one night.
You felt one.
It's related to my film career, actually.
Do you mean you sensed a ghost or you assaulted a ghost?
No, you could feel it. You could feel it pass through the room.
Right, okay.
They had told us that the house we were in was haunted, so I shouldn't have been surprised. I was doing a film program at a place it's now called Main Media Workshops, and I shared a room with this Icelandic dude named Elvar Kjartansson.
Right.
And we were just sleeping one night, and all of a sudden, he just wakes up screaming. And then in a split second, I could feel the energy go through the room, go through me, and then we're both just sort of screaming in the room in the middle of the night. And that was it. It was nothing, it was not like, ooh, I've come to haunt you. No. It was just authentic energy, and it was surprising, and it was scary.
And during the evenings on this kind of film writing program, were you taking any drugs for the evening? Were you... Hello and welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Ruzicka.
And I'm Andres Lorente. And unlike on other podcasts where they just talk and chat for hours, we on the Two Real Cinema Club talk about a couple of films for less than an hour and a half normally.
Normally, about that.
2 films. We can talk about 2 films in less than 90 minutes.
That's less than the time it would take you to watch one of the films from tonight's
That's
list.
true. Where they both clocked in around 140, something like that now?
Yes, two pleasingly short films. At least, well, any film that comes in under 2 hours now, or under 2.5 hours, feels like a short film these days. So this episode we have watched... and I am wary of poo-pooing what I'm calling long tail sequels to hit movies from the 1980s.
Yeah.
Because I was one of the many people who was adamant that I had no interest in a sequel to Top Gun.
Yeah.
Didn't want to see it, was not interested. And then Maverick turned out to be the Two Real Cinema Club Film of the Year 2 years ago. So I'm not going to prejudge Beetlejuice, which is out in the cinemas at the moment, sequel to the 1988 original Beetlejuice.
It sounds like 2 films, Beetlejuice. It should be 3 hours long.
And we are comparing it. So I feel like we should be, the obvious thing is to compare it to Beetlejuice from 1988. But no, we've gone one step further. We are comparing it to...
The Others. What is that, 2000? I want to say 2001, but it might be...
It is 2001, yes.
Featuring Nicole Kidman. It is the film of kind of a really smart, talented guy. Was it Alejandro Amenabar? It's different. There's some ghosts in it. They have some similarities. I think if we'd watched Beetlejuice again, it would have really felt like we watched maybe the same film or something very similar twice. So I think it was a good idea that we mixed it up a little bit with The Others.
I think it's a great pairing. I think there's a lot to be learned about the craft of ghost movies from putting these 2 films back to back.
Yeah.
But I won't spoil anything by telling you which film teaches you the good lessons and which film teaches you the things to avoid. We'll start with Beetlejuice though. So, directed by Tim Burton. We were talking before we started recording about what a bizarre career Tim Burton has had.
Yeah.
First made Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985, then Beetlejuice in 1988, and then stepped straight into Batman the year after that.
Yeah.
So we've got quite a few of the old cast back. Winona Ryder returns, Catherine O'Hara returns, plus some new talent, most notably Jenna Ortega. This film was written by, do you know who it was written by?
Well, I took notes. I cheated. I looked at the credits and stuff like that. Someone named Alfred, is it Goff maybe?
I think it must be Alfred Goff. Yep.
And Miles Miller. They seem to be a pair, a writing
They do. So they've written a bunch of projects together. They wrote Shanghai Noon, whether you ever saw that, Jackie Chan vehicle. They wrote Lethal Weapon 4, which was a perfectly serviceable film. Spider-Man 2, which a lot of people feel is the best Spider-Man movie. They wrote the Hannah Montana movie.
Sequel writers to a certain extent.
Yeah. But more than all that, they wrote the recent Netflix series Wednesday, which greatly enhanced Jenna Ortega's reputation. And I think that is the reason why they've ended up with this gig now. That seems most likely.
There's a third writer mentioned as well, Seth Grahame-Smith.
Oh, God. That's when I didn't even write that in my notes.
Oh.
Who's Seth Grahame-Smith?
I don't know. Who is he?
You see, if we were proper professional screenwriters, I might have answered some of these.
I had it earlier, but they are all like all the writers are sort of like blockbuster guys. Like they're a couple of big films, not like huge, lengthy resumes necessarily, but some pretty big projects. So Seth Grahame-Smith, I've got him up. Ladies and gentlemen listening, 2 Real Cinema Club family members, I just went to IMDb. In case you don't want to listen to one of our podcasts, just go to IMDb sometime.
Do your own research.
Beetlejuice, the Lego Batman movie, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Yikes. Another Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
I'm starting to spot the pattern now.
Yeah. So something of a knack for all three writers of producing sequel content. And also sort of very, very commercial material, it sounds like. And I don't know how well that goes with Tim Burton. So let's continue talking about that later on.
Well, shall I tell you the story then of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice?
Yeah, I know the story. I saw the movie, buddy.
Well, I got to the end of the movie and I had to turn to the rest of the family and say, what
just happened?
What was the story, actually? So, this supernatural comedy sees the return of Winona Ryder as Lydia Dietz, who was the gothic teenager in Beetlejuice, and now, as an adult, she's the host of a television show about paranormal phenomena. She is haunted by visions of Beetlejuice, Michael Keaton's demonic stripe-suited imp from the original film, who almost tricked her into marriage and a life in hell 30 years ago. But now she has a daughter of her own, the surly Astrid, played by Jenna Ortega, and she has a suitor in the form of Rory, who is a television producer, played by Justin Theroux. When Lydia's father dies in a weirdly animated plane crash, we'll talk about that in a moment, her mother, Catherine O'Hara, playing artist Delia Dietz, and Astrid, so the three generations of women, arrange a funeral at their old family home. Meanwhile, in the underworld, Beetlejuice is tied up in an office job, and his ex-wife Dolores has returned from the dead, bent on revenge. And Astrid starts seeing a boy who is more dangerous than he seems. So we have a whole bunch of crises all happening simultaneously. And to sort things out, Lydia must call on Beetlejuice to help once again. But what price will she have to pay this time?
Well set up as always, sir. Oh, man.
But I did have to go through my notes at some length to distill the story down into something quite as short and neat as that. I came out of this film and I felt like this film, more than many that we've seen recently, exemplifies the value of asking those same screenwritery type questions that we keep asking every week.
Yep.
Because I must say, watching the credits roll, we all turned to each other and we said, well, that was a bit random, wasn't it? This film does feel like an almost random, arbitrary sequence of scenes glued together in the hope of forming a coherent film.
Yeah.
And I think that the reason it doesn't feel like a coherent film is because it can't answer, I reckon, tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think it can answer those same straightforward screenwritery questions. Namely, I was asking myself, Whose story is it? And I'm not entirely sure whose story it is. Is it Lydia's story? Is it maybe Beetlejuice's story? Is it Astrid's story? There's so many little different strands, and it feels like they're all subplots, and none of them is the actual plot. I was asking kind of, what are the rules of this world? Because there's an awful lot of traveling down to the underworld and then returning to the real world, going up a ladder and then going back through a door and then re-emerging in the real world. And then finally, I must say, I came to the end and I was asking myself, what's the film about? And I don't really know. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure what it's about, and I'm not sure that it's about very much at all. Just don't really know. Did you come away able to answer any of these questions?
Well, I've been generous, I guess, in my reviewing. I think it's Lydia's story as far as I can tell. But that just seems like the most sensible story. And the film sort of starts and ends with her. So, I mean, I'm just using those cues. I think they tried to write Lydia's story. I don't think it does a good job of this, but it's about family as far as I can tell, because there's the death of a father, there's a potential marriage in there, death of a husband for Lydia's mother, a relationship that's sort of broken. It's the classic mother-daughter at odds, eventually healing that, and in the meantime, the daughter is at maybe her first romantic relationship come and go as well. So I think it's about family in times of crises, but
is it trying to suggest that family is what you can lean on in times of crises, or is it telling you, family are the cause of all these crises?
I think, yeah.
Is it telling you that, don't listen to your family, but listen to some members of the family? Is it telling you that it's the dead members of your family who've got things really sorted out and the living ones are all screw-ups?
I think all of that's kind of true, yeah. I think probably mostly that family gets you into crises. Ultimately, the point of this film is kind of that at the very end, as long as there's a book that has the rules of the world and a spell or a potion in the book, it really just very obviously says, this is a book of witchcraft or something. Then you've got the solution for all the problems. It's just one of these Deus ex machina kind of things where, we've got the book, we can get rid of Beetlejuice. In some ways, it's a pro-literacy film. I think they're saying use the book. Follow the book. No one was looking at the book. They finally look at the book and everything gets solved.
So really what the film is trying to say is read books to get the answers.
Yes.
That's a message I can get behind.
And for some reason, sing MacArthur Park as much as possible in the beginning and in the end of the film, because that's another way to solve problems.
I wrote in my notes that this film feels like an 8-hour series compressed into a 90-minute film.
Yeah.
Because there are basically it's an incredible multiplicity of subplots. Yeah. I started writing them out. We have got. Should we ring the spoiler bell? Maybe we should, because I'm going to spoil some things now.
Yes.
So let's ring the spoiler bell, and then I'm going to start listing subplots. Here it is. Here's the bell. For whom does the bell toll?
Oh boy. Well, a lot of people, clearly. It tolls for lots of characters.
It tolls for these plots. So we have the plot of the scurrilous suitor who proposes at the funeral and then tries to hurry up the wedding. We have the plot of the performance artist who is killed by her own snake. We have the plot of Dolores, the ex-wife, seeking revenge on Beetlejuice. We have the plot of Astrid and her ghost boyfriend. The boyfriend turns out to be a ghost.
That is a spoiler right there. You very generously did not tell people he was a ghost at first. I love that about your synopsis. Now that we've rung the spoiler bell, the dude's a ghost.
Spoil away. We have the subplot of Astrid's dead father, who it turns out is working a clerical job in the underworld, stamping passports. we have a subplot of like a French street artist who falls down a manhole and then gets lost in hell.
That's a pretty fast one, but I did wonder about that one, yeah.
We have this kind of subplot of Lydia having flashbacks to Beetlejuice and suffering with PTSD. We have a subplot about Willem Dafoe playing a dead actor who believes that he is a cop. We have all of these subplots, but none of those is the actual plot. And none of those stories actually belongs to Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice feels like a little bit of a third-rate bit part in his own film.
Yeah.
He turns up a couple of times, but that's about it.
He's attached to the Dolores thing. So Dolores is his first wife or his only wife, I guess. and she's come back to seek revenge on him because he sort of he put a spell on her or something like that, and terminated the marriage basically, and then he went on to do his things. So she comes back. She's obviously not mentioned in the first film. This is a new character played by Monica Bellucci, I think.
Yes.
And she has one of the best scenes when she reassembles her body parts. For some reason, they were all chopped up and shipped in boxes, and they're in some sort of storeroom in hell. And then it's quite a wonderful scene. I think that's kind of like the money shots right there is when she's putting her body back together.
It's all played to the sound of tragedy by the Bee Gees, isn't it?
Gees,
so it's all kind of amusing.
Yeah, but then she just sort of wanders around the film sucking souls and not really doing a whole lot other than sort of contributing to the Rory. They bring those two storylines together. Rory's the fiance of Lydia's character, Winona Ryder's character, and then they get married. They basically, Beetlejuice gets rid of both of them. It's a 2-for-1 where he gets rid of both of them. And then I'd forgotten all about the sandworms. All of a sudden I was back in Dune. But he sends Lydia and he sends Dolores and Rory into hell married, and then they get swallowed up by a sandworm almost immediately. So I think the Beetlejuice plot he's got his hands in just about all of those plots, right? Beetlejuice becomes this focal point, and that's why you'd think, well, maybe it's called Beetlejuice. Maybe the film's about him, but I think he's just sort of this ancillary character to these many subplots. And you put it very beautifully in the opening, just saying there are too many stories without the one story. You really think about a plot, and then we think about subplots. And this is all subplots, and it's really hard to weave that all together and make a coherent story. So that's why you end up, I think, asking, whose story is it and what is it about? Because I've been all over the place and been nowhere all at the same time.
I wrote down, do you know The Dice Man? Have you ever read that?
No.
So it's 90. I had to look it up. I have read it a long time ago. It's a 1971 novel written by George Cockcroft, although he writes under the name of Luke Reinhardt. It's a story of the guy, I think he's a psychiatrist possibly, and he makes this arbitrary decision that he's going to live his whole life based on the roll of a die. And so he's going to just write down random choices on a piece of paper, and whatever the die tells him to do, he will just do. It's very 70s, slightly druggy, peculiar book. Quite entertaining. And I reckon this film was written on broadly the same principle, because it felt like they just kept rolling a die and then writing out whatever scene came up at random. It's like they were saying, if I roll a 1, I'm going to write a scene with a stripy sandworm in. Here's a 1. Okay, if I roll a 5, someone falls down a manhole.
Yeah.
If I roll a 4, then Danny DeVito as the janitor will pass out after being randomly electrocuted and knock over some coffins, leading to Dolores escaping.
That's it, yeah.
And then at some point they rolled a 3, and so they decided to do the next 2 minutes as a stop-motion cartoon. It's just an endless sequence of random choices.
Yes.
Sometimes that can feel entertaining and unpredictable, but sometimes it can just feel a little bit tiresome and directionless. And I think that's sort of what this feels like.
Yes, agreed, totally. And it just means that also major characters are off screen for long periods of time, and that's why you start to forget where they were and what their story was. It just makes it such that you inevitably lose track of who the characters are, what they're doing in the story, and why they are there. So it just makes it ultimately that makes the viewer's experience much more difficult. So the writing is just kind of all over the place, and that makes it very difficult to watch. And that's why your family was turning to you afterwards and saying, what just happened?
This film could really do with some thinning out, I think. Willem Dafoe is kind of perfectly entertaining, but you know what? The film will function perfectly well without him.
Yeah. Monica
Bellucci is a tremendous actor.
Yeah.
And to see her sort of turn up as sort of a cameo, which has very little effect on the plot.
Yep.
She's pursuing Beetlejuice supposedly through the whole film, although it feels like there's a good 50 minutes or an hour where she never appears on screen at all, and then she just pops up again at the end. You never really get much feel of the threat, and she's disposed of within seconds when she arrives at the final denouement. Again, her character could just be disposed of, and I don't think the film would miss it. You could thin out a lot of this story and end up with something that lets you concentrate on the characters that we're really interested in. Whereas instead we just end up with lots of random rolls of the die.
It is odd that it's only, I think it was an hour and 45 minutes, hour and 50 minutes, something like that. And yet all of that happens. So if you did thin it out, I wonder what you would have. You know, you'd be down to like 35 minutes of film. It makes me think, I hate to say this, maybe they didn't need to make another Beetlejuice film. I mean, I hate to cause controversy, but I'm not sure that this film goes under the category of necessary.
But man, if you're only going to make films that come under the category of necessary, then the multiplexes will be very empty, won't they? There is, I did write one quote down for the quotation bank.
Oh, good. I have one too.
Quotation bank. My favourite quote from the whole film, I think this is the only one that I actually wrote down in my notebook, is that Astrid and Lydia find themselves on the weird sandworm desert planet at one point, and Astrid looks up and kind of says, "Oh, that's Saturn in the sky. It must be on one of its moons." And then she says, "This afterlife is so random."
Yeah.
And I thought, that's the most self-aware moment in the whole film. It really is. Yes, well said.
The line I wrote down is one of the worst lines I've heard in a long time. And I guess the reason I wrote it down is because this film really tries very hard to get laughs, and it tries very hard to be a better film than it actually is. And it keeps falling flat again and again. So the line I wrote down was when Dahlia is waiting to be served in hell. That's Lydia's mother. Is her name Dahlia?
Right.
Yeah.
Delia I wrote down, but it could be Dahlia.
Delia is waiting for her turn, like to call her number in hell. And she says, "I have global entry. Is there a line for that?" I thought that was a terrible line.
I don't know whether you saw Wednesday on Netflix.
No, not yet.
So Alice is quite keen to watch it. So she watched it all. I watched like about the last 3 or 4 episodes. Yeah. So everyone else in the family was a little bit more up to date with it than me, and I kind of sat down and just watched the second half of the series. And I wasn't super impressed. And Alice asked me, "Why don't you like it?" And the best summary I could come up with was that it just wasn't funny enough.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of gags in Wednesday, and most of the gags feel a little bit like they could be placeholder gags while they were waiting for a better line to occur to them. And if you're going to write a movie or a TV series, which is largely relying on its comedic chops to entertain you, then you've really got to put the effort into the gags. There's some really, really terribly overplayed gags in this film. The worst one, I think, is the Soul Train gag, which is a gag that they obviously liked so much they just kept repeating it. And it feels like there's 3 or 4 minutes of just people dancing in 1970s costumes with afros because they're about to get on the Soul Train.
Yeah.
And I had to explain to the children what Soul Train was. They had no idea. But I think if you're under 60... that gag isn't particularly funny because you don't really remember what Soul Train was. No. It hasn't been a thing for 40 years. No. And yet the film expends an awful lot of energy repeating again and again the Soul Train gag that they're very pleased with.
And even the MacArthur Park thing, there's an entire set piece around the wedding based on MacArthur Park, which again is... I was a kid, that song was a hit. So it's 50-something years old. So again, if you're under 60, you've never heard that song... I still don't know what it's about. Something about a cake that's left in the park in the rain. But for some reason, they do an entire sequence around that. And it didn't know where to be funny, and it didn't know where to save some time and get the story moving. It was and the writers, I don't think, are that old, really. They're probably younger than we are, or around that age. So maybe they grew up with it, and that's why there's some sort of touchstone there. But for a lot of people, you're right. There's no touchstone to those things whatsoever.
I think if you've come into this film via Jenna Ortega because you've enjoyed her on Wednesday, and especially if you haven't seen the first Beetlejuice, I think you'll be utterly perplexed by this film. It relies a lot on the world building from the first film, and it just feels so kind of disjointed and with so many weird references. I think it might be quite difficult to enjoy.
Well, I had a hard time enjoying it, so I guess that doesn't put me among the Jenna Ortega generation, but it was hard to enjoy. Yeah, I agree. I mean, and again, there's this, in this end scene, Beetlejuice comes out with a truth serum to get Rory to tell the truth. And then the book of that comes out at the end, the book of witchcraft, in order to get rid of Beetlejuice. All that is like hand of God stuff. It just all of a sudden appears. And I think that's what you were talking about when you said the rules. There are no rules there. Anything can happen at any time. And at the end, all of a sudden, they come up with all these solutions that are really just coming out of nowhere whatsoever. So it's not really the rules that we're used to. It's not the world that's been established. And all of a sudden, we have new rules in this world. So
I turned to the family at the end of the film and I said I didn't understand how Willem Dafoe, as the kind of the fake police captain, spent most of the film trying to find Beetlejuice when it had already been established that if you just say his name three times, he appears. So why is he going to all this effort?
I guess he hadn't seen the first film.
That's where he was going wrong.
36 years too late.
I have got a couple of mildly amusing asides about the film, which I only found out after doing a little bit of research, doing my own research, after watching the film. The boy who plays Jeremy, who is Jenna Ortega's love interest, the ghost boy who turns out to be bad. It turns out that I used to do comedy gigs with both of his parents. His parents are Nina Conti, who used to do this fairly amusing puppet act with this little monkey, and Andrew Stanley, who was a stand-up also around the same sort of time. So I used to do gigs with both of his parents, and I didn't realise that they were an item. I didn't realise that they had a boy, and I didn't realise that he was in Beetlejuice. This is like his first big gig, I think. And interestingly, the actor who plays Bob, who is the kind of the head shrunken sidekick to Beetlejuice, is Nick Kellington, who is incredibly famous in Britain as a bodysuit actor. I think he was in the Teletubbies. He played Iggle Piggle in the Night Garden. So if there's anybody in the UK especially who's ever had a child under the age of 4, then you will have spent many, many hours watching Nick Kellington be Iggle Piggle on television's In the Night Garden on the BBC.
What a specialist. He's a bodysuit actor.
He's as good as they get.
But we wouldn't recognize him on the street.
So that guy gets all the good and none of the bad.
I thought one thing that was pretty good, and as I read about it after the fact, I realized, okay, that's why they did it, was the animation scene where Delia's husband was eaten by a shark. And I realized that was all animated because Jeffrey Jones is persona non grata. He was a former actor who just had a thing for child pornography. So they wanted him out of the film, out of the storyline. So they have him eaten by a shark in this animated sequence early in the film. And I don't think there's any other animation after that. So it's a little bit jarring because all of a sudden you're getting this backstory on this character that they just want to put an end to in a vicious way.
Oh, God, it is jarring, and I did not realize that was the backstory.
Yeah, that's the backstory.
Oh, wow. Okay, all right.
So it makes sense.
So perhaps we should be glad that more of the film isn't animated, because now anytime I see an animated section from any mainstream film, I'm going to wonder what's the background behind this. Oh, dear. Well, I'll tell you one thing. We were talking about how there are so many ancient references and ancient TV references, ancient songs in this movie. One other ancient reference is that the office where Beetlejuice works in the underworld seems to be an office which has been written about or designed by someone who hasn't been into an office for at least 70 years. Because what they have got in that office is a switchboard. The only people in the modern world I know who've got a switchboard are law enforcement. And now that you mention law enforcement, maybe we should place our own underworld call to the Cliché Squad.
But you've got to get the Hell District Squad.
Cliché Squad.
So, for a film that's probably largely wearing its originality on its sleeve, and certainly for Beetlejuice, its main selling point was, why goodness, look how crazy and weird this film is. So for a film which is supposed to be tremendously original and strange, did you spot any cliches?
I did. And I agree with you about it should be strange. Like, I think a Tim Burton film should have some edge to it, And I think this was just, there's not any of that really old Burton essence in it. It's just all Hollywood. And as a result, there are some cliches that they could cut out. Mother-daughter tension and at odds. I mean, that's been done a million times, where the girl's been sent off to boarding school and then they're mad at each other. And by the end of the film, they get back together. angry teens in general. There are a lot of angry teens in this film, it seems. And I work with teenagers. They're not that angry, but I think just as a caricature device, I would say it's just kind of tired. Halloween night. For me, that's a cliche now. It's just this excuse to do anything. And as we've said, this film just wants to do whatever it wants at any given time without really paying much attention to story. So Halloween night becomes this night it's the marriage of Lydia and Rory. It's a night when Jenna sort of gets captured by her love interest, Jeremy, and then he takes her down to hell. I mean, a lot of stuff happens on Halloween night. I mean, a lot of stuff happens in this film, but it just kind of comes to a real head on Halloween night. And I also just think there's sort of a ghost in the machine cliche here that I've mentioned already. If you've got a good spell book, you can rescue anyone and solve any situation at the last minute. So I do like it. It's pro-literacy. It's all about reading good books, but it's a cliche.
It is. I wrote a number of different cliches on my list as well, which is bad art. This film kind of sneers at all art, isn't it? And it doesn't really matter whether it's sculpture or painting or performance art. It's all bad. Art is bad. Again, which is kind of such a cliche, isn't it? The vengeful wife. We were saying earlier that Monica Bellucci is a tremendous actor, and she has to play this character who she has no motivation or plan or desire or need or ambition of any kind except the desire for revenge on a man. That is the only thing that she is. That's the only aspect of her character that exists. And she doesn't even affect anything. So she's utterly ineffectual, despite her having this singular, poorly thought out motivation. The obviously evil, scheming suitor. So it's obvious from the very first moment that he appears on screen that Rory is a bad one. And he's a suitor to. Surprise, surprise. Yeah. And then finally I read the emo boy meet cute. that Jeremy has a treehouse, he has vinyl records, he has floppy hair. Yes, it's like a little tick box of emo boy cute things.
Jenna runs her bicycle into his through his fence and into his treehouse. That's going pretty far for meet cute, but yeah, I mean, I think this another film that makes me rethink Tim Burton, because I kind of loved some of that early stuff and that early weirdness, but whenever I look at his IMDb, I just think there's so many films that are a lot of meh. I get a lot of meh.
Yeah, yep.
I think there's just a lot of potential there, and I think he's always worked with writers. I think he's worked with a lot of different writers, and it's too bad he never found one really solid writer to do things with over the years. I will say this, and we haven't mentioned this at all, Danny Elfman. Oh my God. Fantastic score. I mean, there are times when the music just saves this film, or it makes it more watchable, because his music is just consistently weird, yet consistently appropriate and, oddly beautiful. And I think Danny Elfman kind of saves the film at times. So I did enjoy that. And that's a long-term collaboration, of course. But I don't know. I think just Tim Burton never found the right writer somehow.
Well, we're available.
Who am I throwing under the bus there? I think I'm throwing Tim Burton under the bus, or am I throwing under the writers? I think I'm doing bad to the writing family. Oh no.
I think all you're trying to say is that directing talent means nothing without good writers.
Yeah. I'm sorry, writers. And I'm sorry, Tim Burton. Yikes. The emails are coming.
Why don't we have a break? And maybe climb up and down some random ladders to and from the underworld, because it's so easy to enter and exit. And then when we come back, we'll talk about some proper ghosts from Alejandro Amenabar. We will talk about The Others.
Our friends and friends of our friends are back again in a collaboration between two companies with the same acronym, FURRY. That's right. The Freedom from Religion Institute and the Feline Facial Recognition and Retina Imaging Group are at it again. and focusing on product development based around the United States Pledge of Allegiance. James, do you remember last time we talked about Witches' Stands?
Yes, I do remember our Witches' Stands.
They're out with another great product. This time
they're unstoppable.
This time they're laser focused on the section that reads One Nation Under Guard. You see, I grew up with Right Guard. It's a deodorant that bills itself as extreme defense sport deodorant. Do you have the Right Guard in the UK? Probably not.
I bet we probably do. It's all Lynx body spray in this country.
God.
It's what's inescapable.
It's all Lynx body spray.
All teenage bedrooms smell of Lynx
my
body spray.
classroom smells like that. The bathrooms smell like that. I hate Lynx. Ugh. Anyway, I was 100% sure when I was a kid that the parent company got themselves written into the Pledge of Allegiance. So I checked in with my friends at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, of which I am a card-carrying member, and they confirmed that the underguard is actually under God. Who would have thought? And was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954.
No, really?
Yes, when someone decided that being indivisible with liberty and justice for all just wasn't enough.
Ah, that's recent, isn't it? That is recent.
1954 is 60-something years. My addition's terrible. 70, almost 70.
70 years ago this year, isn't it?
I should have gotten that one right. 2024. But the people at both furries know a thing or two about odor control, and whether it comes from cat litter boxes or invasions of the church into the state in the form of edited pledges of allegiance that don't pass the smell test. Together, the furries have formulated Under Guard. This is my dream come true, because I always thought it was Under Guard in the first place. It's a body odor balm stick that is not only safe for humans, but also for our cats. Not just for the armpits, but also for use in any odor-producing human any odor-producing human or feline body parts. Who writes this stuff?
I don't know, but they're not paid nearly enough.
Better still, Underguard works wonders against ideas that stink. Oh, I like that one.
Oh, that's good.
Spread the stick under your own nose or that of a loved one, or even a hated one, and enjoy the protection of an extreme defense sport deodorant against extremely offensive odors. This is the best idea to cure the worst ideas and odors. Ooh, that's a bold statement. Underguard, the full body deodorant for all of you and your cat's indivisible body parts. Look for Underguard at furry.com or your local supermarket. And like the real God, good luck finding it. Anywhere other than the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance. Furry and furry, doing our part and pledging to get God out of the Pledge of Allegiance one meow at a time. Ooh, a sound effect. Good production.
That was good.
There you go. Underguard. Got a good song.
Sign me up. And we are back. Back from rather picturesque New England, travelling across the Atlantic to Jersey. Ooh. I completely forgotten this film was set in Jersey, to watch The Others from 2001. So this movie is about Alejandro Amenabar. And spoiler alert, I wrote here in my notes after watching the film, I've got a little section here marked thoughts, and I wrote, first of my thoughts, I wrote, this might be the finest ghost film ever.
Oh my gosh. You spoiled it. It was a ghost film? What?
I really enjoyed coming back to this. I had seen it first time around in 2001 when it was released. Haven't seen it since. Yep. So it's great to come back now. But I didn't choose this film.
You didn't? No.
You chose this film. Tell me, how come you chose The Others to compare with Beetlejuice?
Do you have any other questions for me, Counsel?
I remember it much the same way you just remembered it. I saw this in a theater 23 years ago. I thought it was really, really good. It's hard to come back to a film like this because you know the surprise, essentially. I guess it'd be like going back and watching The Sixth Sense or something like that. So you know the surprise, but it's so atmospheric. It's done really, really well. It's super visual. There's plenty of dialogue, but there's not a lot of unnecessary dialogue or anything like that. It's really well written. And also, I think I knew that Beetlejuice was going to be a silly comedy. This is a drama. This is a ghost drama, which I think is makes it unique. I know we batted the idea of watching the first Beetlejuice around, but
there was one other film which I'm going to talk about when we come to also playing at this theatre.
Okay, perfect. Okay,
So I'm going to hold on to that as
Excellent.
my little punchline for the podcast. But I think this is not the obvious pairing, but I think it's a masterful one.
Yeah, I like it.
How well do you know his other movies?
So Alejandro Amenabar, the accent is on the na, I believe. He scared the hell out of me one night. Scared. We talked about that ghost in the opening. I don't know if the audience is going to hear that or not, but I was in a motel, just a cheap motel room in Cuba, and I saw his first film, feature, I think, Thesis, which is scary. It was wonderful. I saw it. I was alone. I was sick. I was vulnerable. It was a brilliant way to see this film, and he just blew my mind away. And then, of course, he wrote Eyes Wide Open, which is Abre los Ojos in Spanish,
yes.
and someone stole it, turned it into Vanilla Sky. Is that Oliver Stone?
So Cameron Crowe.
That's what
turned it into Vanilla Sky.
Turned it into Vanilla Sky. And then he also made a film called The Sea Inside, which I think is brilliant. That has maybe Javier Bardem. Am I getting any of these names right? The Sea Inside is a wonderful film about a paraplegic Spanish man who wants to die, and he has to petition the government or trick the government into being able to have a what do they call it? Medical suicide? What's the
Euthanasia.
euthanasia, merciful sort of
medical euthanasia,
death by choice sort of thing. And that's a great film. These are very, very different films. The guy is pretty talented. He wrote this script. I mean, I'm assuming he's a native Spanish speaker, but he's obviously written a script into English with some mastery, I guess. He wrote the music for this film.
Yeah, he wrote the music. Yes,
and he did all that with Tom Cruise as an executive producer. Go figure. So, I mean, I think that explains some of the connections. Vanilla Sky features Tom Cruise.
Yeah. So obviously, it must be the Vanilla Sky is what allowed this film to get made. I think.
So it's pretty early in his filmmaking, but Thesis is brilliant. If I would recommend anyone, if you want a good scare, go back and see Thesis. So he'd already made, I think, one of the scariest films I've ever encountered. And this is a wonderful, creepy film. It's all about atmosphere and eeriness. And I could tell you some of the story if you're ready for it, but if you have something else to share.
No, tell me the story. I want to hear all about it.
It stars Nicole Kidman, of course, and Christopher Eccleston plays her husband, Charles, who comes back. Fionnuala Flanagan plays Mrs. Mills.
Mrs. Mills.
As well. So those are sort of the three main-ish characters. Nicole Kidman's children, or Grace is the name of the character, are also featured. I like the way it starts. It starts with this fairy tale storybook. It's in this sort of glowing light. And Nicole Kidman sort of starts out by saying if the children are quiet, ready, she's gonna read them a story. But we just see the pages of the book flipping, and the last image of the story is of an angel hanged to death. So I mean, the tone is there before we've even seen anyone on screen. What we do see on screen is Grace, played by Nicole Kidman. She's in bed. She starts screaming herself awake as if from a nightmare. So she's in this big, they set up this castle-like, right? I mean, it's this huge estate, very dark, very scary looking. There's very little color in the film to a certain extent, and part of that because the spaces are intentionally dark, but it's sort of drained of color, drained of life. So she's in this very creepy sort of mansion estate, and these servants come to help her because her husband is off at war, and the previous servants suddenly vanished. She roams this house with lots and lots of doors that are all locked at all times. There are curtains everywhere, so there's no light coming in through the window. There's no electricity, and it's a mostly sort of silent home. So the setup is immediately perfect for thrills and chills. Her children, Anne and Nicholas, have an alleged allergy to light. Dr. Ruzicka, anything to that?
This is another film that I watched with the whole family.
Yeah.
And when she started talking about the children being allergic to light, my son gave me this side-eye look, like, oh, yeah, right, yeah.
I'd Googled it, of course, and they said, yeah, there's something. It's got a fancy name, and about 7 people on the planet have it. So, but for her, it's an excuse to keep the children in darkness. We learned that these same 3 servants, Mrs. Mills, I think it's
Mrs. Mills,
Mr. Tuttle, and
yes.
Lydia, who's sort of a mute younger woman, not their daughter. They don't seem to be related, but they all worked there before. And the 2 kids, Anne and Charles, live in quite a bit of fear. They don't want to be separated. They're definitely scared of seeing a ghost. And they're also scared of ending up in children's limbo in the next life. Grace assures them, though, that if they stay out of the light, they will be all right. But Grace is frightened and hears crying, and it's not Nicholas, and it's not Anne. It's ghosts, perhaps, and perhaps a boy named Victor, who the kids occasionally see. But do they really see him? And is Victor really a ghost?
Oh, great, good.
I think there's a cliche on the Two Real Cinema Club that we always end these synopses with questions now.
Always end with a question.
Call the cliche squad.
keep the audience hungry. One of the joys of this film, I think, is the way, and you've already kind of alluded to this, that it's filled with misdirection, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it sets up a scenario, and then it really cleverly exploits every permutation of the story elements.
Yeah.
I think this is one of those films which is made to be watched twice, because watching it, I sort of watched it through my own eyes and simultaneously through my children's eyes, who had never seen it.
Yeah.
And then I asked them at the end, did you guess the twist? And they didn't guess the twist at all. We'll come on to that later. But when you watch the film for the second time, you can clearly see that they are telling you what the twist is in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's there in plain sight and yet utterly disguised. But basically, the film gets you to ask all of the possible questions. You guys go, are there ghosts? Is it just in Grace's imagination? Yeah. Is Grace ill? Is this part of her migraine?
Yeah. Is
she the victim of a con? Or maybe the children are ghosts, or maybe the servants are ghosts.
Yeah.
Maybe Anne is faking it to get attention. There are lots and lots of different possible permutations, and they wave them just under your nose and make you look this way and that way, like a good magic trick. It's very skillfully told.
And it's skillfully told also in the sense that even though you have that material, that it still scares you. It still surprises you, even though it's explored all these different storylines. So, I don't want to go to synthesis. Don't go to synthesis. Don't go to synthesis. I'm not going to talk about how the storylines differ dramatically between the 2 films, but maybe you'll talk about that.
There's a place for that.
And, there's so much teasing. They find a book of the dead with photos of all these people at death, which seems really weird to me, but I guess, they're saying that was a tradition, I guess, in Jersey.
Yeah, that was a real thing.
They used to take a picture of someone when they died. Yeah. So they find this book in the house, and that becomes crucial later. The midpoint's great, where Grace hears this music in the parlor, but there's really no one there, no one playing the piano, and then she suddenly sort of gets pushed out and locked out. So I guess we can spoil. I mean, it's an old film, right?
We should ring the bell.
Okay,
ring the funeral bell.
There's a great twist in the sense that the ghosts seem like the humans, and the humans are actually really the ghosts in the film. And that's just lovely. It's just a simple turn that makes for a great story. And there's this wonderful eerie sequence of scenes, really, where the gardener, Mr. Tillis, has
Tuttle,
buried up the cemetery so she can't see gravestones, and she walks out into this really foggy, just eerie woods, and all of a sudden her husband's just there. So he just kind of reappears in his uniform and all that. He's left the war. And he's just kind of catatonic. He seems really dead, which is another clue. But at the same time, a soldier who's been traumatized might just be that sort of catatonic in that kind of state. And I felt kind of sorry for Nicole Kidman because they're two films more or less right in a row. This one and a scene with Jude Law in Cold Mountain where in a short period of time she just suffers the same fate. She gets these returning husbands. There's this brief moment of intimacy, and then the husband is either already dead or soon to be dead after they have sexual congress. It's just like, bam, bad luck in both films. And they're, maybe a couple of years apart, and you're thinking, geez, what's going on? Why is that a recurring theme in her acting? It's because she was married to Tom Cruise. Oh, no. Wait a second, but we do love Tom Cruise. Maverick.
She kept reminding me of Grace Kelly in this film. She started doing her best Grace Kelly impression with the hair and the dress.
Yeah. She's great. I think she's fantastic in this film. The acting is perfectly fine, wonderful. The kids are even pretty good.
The kids are good, yeah.
So it sort of ends up that I love the seance sequence towards the end. The husband's disappeared. He's left them. The kids are kind of mad at their mother because she's becoming more and more erratic. And then there's just this wonderful seance scene in the film which starts to explain everything. And we learn in the seance that she's actually killed them in the house and then she shot herself. So they've been haunting this house that they've been occupying, or at least looks like they've been occupying while they're living. But in fact, they're dead. They're ghosts.
I'm guessing the pitch for this movie was something like it's turn of the screw from the ghost's point of view.
Ooh. Yeah.
Which is, I don't know if you read that Henry James sort of, it's like a novella or a short story.
I haven't. Yeah. I know a little bit about it, but yeah.
I can't remember a film which has taken the same reversed angle, sort of change of point of view as this before 2001. It seems today like a really obvious twist, but it's very clever, very effective, and very original. Really works,
and a really great kind of closing. A very simple closing scene where the servants are going to work together with Nicole and the children to sort of continue to haunt that house. And so there's a for sale sign. They've driven out the new owners.
Yes,
there's a for sale sign up, and by images, the place goes from occupied to unoccupied, but actually sort of is the opposite. It sort of goes from unoccupied to occupied. It's just, again, nice little twists that are so well done that it makes for a great film.
Great, straightforward dialogue as well. Her final line of the film is, "No one can make us leave this house." Yeah. She says as people drive away, it's lovely. It's that's probably what ghosts think, isn't it? It's lovely.
Yes.
And there's a scene at dinner, I had to write down a few quotes from this, where the children tell her, "Oh, we'll never go anywhere." She says, "You're not missing out on anything. You're much better off at home."
Yeah.
It's everything is so well foreshadowed. We went back and watched the first 5 minutes again, and even the foreshadowing there is very masterfully written. Mrs. Mills explains about she says that Lydia is unable to speak, but she says, don't be mistaken, she's older than she looks.
Yes, yeah.
She tells it. Everything is there. Even there. Like the very first time that the three servants turn up on screen, they're heading to the house and they're having a chat.
Yep.
And Mr. Tuttle, he says something like, they're talking about people that they used to work with or for, and he says, I'm sure they'll be dead by now, like all the rest. It's
yes,
they're basically telling you the answer in those first 3 or 4 minutes of the film, and yet it takes you the whole film to realise what it is that you have watched. By which time you've forgotten those early moments, and they're there for you to enjoy when you see the film for a second time.
That last line that you were talking about with Nicole Kidman about no one else ever can force us from this house. See, some producers would say, "Okay, the others too." Or the other others, or Beetlejuice others, or something like that. They'd come up with another film. I think this one needs to stand alone. It's perfectly fine. Don't remake it. Don't sequelize it or anything like that. The balance of dark and light scenes was fantastic. There's lots of darkness, there's lots of lightness, but it never gets really happy light. It's always, foggy. It's always sort of sepia. It's never really a clean looking film, which works. It's just all about great atmospherics. And that looking for her husband in the foggy forest is just, and then he appears. It's magical, but it's also weird, and it's just scary enough.
It's all just filmed in a single location, isn't it? And again, I kind of wasn't particularly conscious of that watching the film. And it's only when you get to the end you realise, they never leave that house, do they? It's all just set in this one single house. I'm slightly surprised that no one has turned this into a play, because it would work very well as a play.
Yep.
And all the ingredients are right there present in the house. It has, like you say, the darkness and the light. They have the mystery. They also have these elements of religion, and the pictures of death, and the ambiguity of who's telling the truth. These little seeds that are sown earlier on in the story and then paid off later on.
Yeah.
It's just very well structured. Desperate for something to criticise, I did make a note. I think there is a slightly too much of a dip in pace during the second half of the second act. Mm-hmm. Christopher Eccleston as the husband. Yeah. I think maybe he has slightly too many scenes of moping around and being a bit sad.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe you could have trimmed 4 minutes there. But, I'm clutching at straws. This is as good a ghost film as I have ever seen.
It's my kind of ghost film, and very clever, very intentional, commercial enough. I think it had a commercial appeal, and I think it did pretty well. It's really an accomplishment. Fantastic film. I'm glad we saw it again.
Having talked about the cast for the previous film, I'm going to make a couple of interesting little notes about things which might not be obvious to an American audience. This film is full of comedians. Mr. Tuttle is played by Eric Sykes, who is an extremely well-known British comedian who was a household name in the 1970s for his television comedy show. And then Keith Allen, who plays the dad of the new family who have the seance and own the house and then sell it and move on. It was also like a big stand-up comedian in like the late 70s, early 80s. He is the dad of Lily Allen, the pop singer. So the film is full of comedians. And interestingly, Keith Allen and Christopher Eccleston were both in Shallow Grave, that Danny Boyle debut film from 1994. So they had worked together before as well. I don't know why I mentioned this, but these are the things that you pick up when you look at the IMDb.
Yeah. Well, I mean, comedians make great actors. I mean, there's no shortage of names in history to prove that. I think it's probably a lot about timing. It's a lot about being in front of people and on stages. And I think it just turns you into a good actor. You have to be acting all the time to a certain extent. And you're also, I think, mining your own personal experience, which is just essential for good acting, I think. You just have to be able to relate to what character you're playing by, sort of accessing parts of your own personality. So lots of comedians become great actors. Hey, Dr. Razika, maybe career change, leave the anesthetics behind. And
yes, abandon medicine for the certainty of acting. What has happened to Alejandro Amenabar's? You're going to have to teach me how to pronounce it properly.
Amenabar, yeah.
Amenabar's career since then, though, because I honestly haven't seen any of the films that he has made since this one, and he's got a few things listed on his kind of list, but but they've all passed
the Rachel
me by.
Weisz thing a few years back, huge period piece, Agora maybe, set in the Roman Empire.
Okay,
those films undo your career, though. I think that's dangerous. You're huge cast, huge budget, hard to tell a good story, and get a blockbuster audience at the same time very often. So I think that might have been part of his undoing. I mean, those earlier films are great, though. I think, if you've got Thesis and Open Your Eyes and See Inside and the others in your history, that's a good career for me.
I just hope that he can pay the rent still.
Oh, I'm sure. They think they make commercials and stuff like that, right? Or, if you're Spanish and Chilean, you just find a great place to live and live off your money.
Well, we threatened it. We're going to have to do it. I think we will try and draw these two very different films together. But before we do that, we have a game to play. Do join me in a quick round of Who Am I?
Who am I?
And much like Anne in The Others, I am jumping up and down on my seat, raising my hand, saying, "Oh, me, choose me, choose me, choose me, choose me."
Thank you.
So I'm going to volunteer to go first.
You just saved me. Thank you.
Because I'm going to as I usually do in this game, I'm going to flatter myself unconscionably by saying that of all the people that I've seen on screen this week, the one I felt most like is Mr. Tuttle in The Others, played by classic British comedian Eric Sykes, because there's something so quintessentially British about this sort of slightly hapless gardener who rakes leaves all day.
Yeah.
and basically, whatever Mrs. Mills says, he just agrees with, because he's figured out that that's how you should have an easy life. I think there is a little bit of Mr. Tuttle in every middle-aged English man, and there certainly is in me, I think. That was me, yep. But did you see yourself on screen this week?
I kind of saw myself. I was surprised to see myself in the character of Wolf Jackson, played by Willem Dafoe. And I think it was because he seems like he has so much purpose, and he has a mission. And as you said earlier, it's a pathetic mission, and he's really just full of a whole lot of hot air. So I saw, maybe not the best of myself, but I saw myself in Wolf Jackson. Which is a good name. Maybe I could take that name, Wolf Jackson.
Yeah, people commonly say how much you look like Willem Dafoe. You're right.
Chiseled, overly chiseled, good looks.
Let's okay. We'll see whether we can. It's a bit of a stretch. It's going to be both hands outstretched as far as they will go. But we're going to see if we can draw these strands together, and we'll do our synthesis.
I have the low-hanging fruit.
Oh, good.
I've got the couple, yeah.
Please harvest away.
This was interesting to me. Some people can see ghosts in both films.
Yes.
The other one that's a little harder to catch, though, is that both films have characters named Lydia and Charles.
Oh, good. I didn't spot that.
Yeah, but Beetlejuice does precede this film, so those characters were in Beetlejuice first, but I do wonder, I better think, I'll use these two names. For me, I think that the biggest thing is a difference of too many storylines. Like in Beetlejuice, we've said it a million times already, that there's just too much going on and too many characters that we're trying to follow, and none of the storylines are that strong to be an A story. Whereas The Others just does this beautiful thing of really, it's just hyper focused on its storyline, and it does it really well. And as a result, it's a tight film. And I think the general feeling I'm getting from your experience watching Beetlejuice with the family was that it's just so loose, and that hurts it. The disorganization of that film just makes it a lesser film, I guess.
Yeah, this afterlife is so random. Yep.
Mm-hmm. How about yourself?
Well, I wrote down here on my little synthesis section in my notebook, I wrote ghost stories are about houses.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Ghost stories, I've written here, they are as much about places as people, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Your people's relationships with places and houses. It kind of reminds me to that extent of Land and Freedom that we watched a few months ago, insofar as, people's relationship with place goes a long way to explaining what they feel and why they feel it. Watching them back to back reminds me, I think, the real joy for ghost stories is ambiguity, isn't it? It's kind of it's doubt and teasing and atmosphere and drawing it out. It's sitting around the campfire with the lights low and just and spinning a yarn. Are they or are they not? Is it a ghost or is it just the wind in the rafters? And there are jump scares in both of these films, I suppose. But I think that the best cinema about ghosts is all about, it's a long game, isn't it? It's about building tensions. And equally, I think the reason that The Others works so well and Beetlejuice is so unsatisfying is that I wrote down here, the best ghost stories resolve like a good equation, all of the pieces falling into place.
Ooh.
And when you get to the end of The Others, all these little seeds that have been planted, they all sprout at the same time, and suddenly you see the garden that you've grown. That's a far too extended metaphor that doesn't work. But
nice
but it's whereas Beetlejuice feels a little bit like Tim Burton has just thrown as many seeds as he can find at random into a field, and at the end of the movie, well, some of them have come up as flowers, and some of them are bushes, and it's not really a garden; it's just a mess. So craft, I think, is the watchword. Really, The Others is full of craft.
Yep.
While Beetlejuice is a bit of a random afterlife.
Yeah, I think it's also there's sort of a tension between The Others being commercial enough, but also being crafty, as you said. And then I think Beetlejuice is just too commercial. Its sense of weird is sort of what is, I guess, American culturally weird. Whereas I think what's weird in The Others is just atmosphere. It's just very simple atmosphere. It's not people dressed up in crazy costumes and people doing wild art and random things happening that makes it weird. What makes it weird is just that house, that entire environment is so scary. And I think it also has a much better message. As I said, I think I'm pulling pretty hard to say that Beetlejuice is about family and reconciliation. I think that The Others is this really interesting meditation on history and leaving history behind. I think there's a very strong message there. Sort of accepting the past and moving on. You're never going to fully move on, but you inhabit the past, I suppose, differently, and you try to leave it behind. And I think, obviously, maybe the ghosts don't do that at all, or maybe they do it a little bit or just enough. But there's a message there, I think, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to come up with a really good why are we making this film from the Beetlejuice peoples.
For The Others, I kind of figured if I could wheedle out a simple unified theme, it is just know yourself, because it's because the characters kind of find a sort of peace by knowing themselves by the time they get to the end of the film. Actually, for Lydia and for Grace, I mean, in The Others, and for her children, it's not hell and it's not a nightmare that they are going to be, together, maybe forever in this house. They're going to make the best of it. Yeah. They sort of know who they are when you get to the final reel, which
does present something of a connection to Beetlejuice, I think.
Well, because they figure out who they are by the end,
who their family is. Yeah. Who their family is, and
I'll buy that.
Even Delia's in hell at the end of Beetlejuice, right? So they know where they are. They know their family again, which they didn't necessarily know before. So I think there's a little connection there. I must say, I'm really impressed with you. You pulled out equations. You've done some mathematics on this pod. You just basically just cited Greek philosophy. You did the know thyself. I learned things on this podcast.
My God, the pressure. We have just got time to talk about what else has been playing at this theatre.
You had a surprise for us. So.
I've got a surprise. So I read online about another film which shares a plot with Beetlejuice. So I thought I would watch it. So I watched a film. I'll tell you the plot and see whether you can guess what the film is that I watched. So it's a film about a couple who have a daughter, and they move into a house, and the house turns out to be haunted. And hoping to save the day, the daughter is the one who calls for help from a supernatural entity. But when the supernatural entity turns up, they turn out to be far more evil than she realised.
Ooh, that sounds like
So this is the plot of Beetlejuice, basically. Yeah. But the film that I watched is Hellraiser from 1987. Which is Clive Barker's kind of debut film. British, relatively low budget body horror, absolutely mad. I'd never seen it before. And there's some fairly remarkable imagery in it. There's some kind of fairly weird, cheesy stuff, but quite a lot to enjoy. And Hellraiser also entirely set within one house. I think there's like a couple of scenes that happen not in the house, but basically the whole film happens in the house. And more than that, it feels like most of the film happens in a stairwell. This house has got this kind of, it's 3 stories and it's got this quite grand stairwell, and pretty much most of the film happens in this stairwell. And they make the absolute most of it they can. That is low budget filmmaking.
I love that point that you made about horror films are about houses. And isn't Lydia's program on, she does this, what is it? It's a TV show or a YouTube show called Ghost House. Yeah. You never see like just a forest haunted. You probably do, but it seems more often it's a house that's haunted. It's not a condo necessarily, or a.
But it's never a takeaway restaurant or a chip van, is it?
Precisely,
It's never a haunted garage or.
It's a haunted house. I saw a couple of things. We started watching. I guess neither one of these is really a film. We started watching Bad Monkey with Vince Vaughn. It's I think on Apple TV.
Okay.
So far, I'm impressed. I like the humor in it. He's sort of a maladjusted detective who's in trouble with his bosses. He gets put on leave for a little while, comes back to solve this murder, or thinks he's going to solve this murder that starts with an arm in the ocean.
Right, okay.
I'm a sucker for stuff like that, living on the ocean and such. But it's good. I liked it. It's pretty good. So I think we're maybe 5 or 6 episodes in. Has some good themes, some good acting. So I'm enjoying that. I watched a documentary on Blake Edwards.
Oh, wow.
Called A Love Story in 24 Frames. It's really about his life with Julie Andrews. They just seem like such an interesting couple. And he's a writer-director who, just exploded in the 60s. I think he struggled in the 70s, sort of came back in the late 70s and early 80s. Just a very interesting documentary about him and their life together and their families, and like tremendous success, as well as absolute horrible failure and bouncing back. So I recommend it. He's an interesting character. Some of his films I really like, but I'm not a huge Blake Edwards fan, but I really liked watching the documentary. And I thought about you a little bit because they spend some time on the film 10, which I saw as a kid. And that was my introduction to Dudley Moore.
That is not a kid's film, 10.
No, definitely not. Oh, goodness. I loved it.
Interestingly, my cousin was visiting us from Canada last weekend, and we went out for a nice dinner in Wimbledon Village, and then we took her for a walk around the edge of Wimbledon Common to Julie Andrews' old house.
Oh.
So she lived in for a few years, I think in the 60s. She lived in a house just on the edge of Wimbledon Common, which you can see the outside of now. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah. They were married for an incredibly long time, 40-something years, I think.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, by the late 60s,
Hollywood.
I think they were coupled, and then I think he died in maybe 2010 or 2014, somewhere in there. So they were together for a long, long time.
Must have been doing something right.
Yeah. Interesting match, though. Interesting match. And it shows, how he was, he got her into a lot of his comedy films, and sometimes it doesn't fit really well, and sometimes she goes into these musical sequences that just seem very non-Blake Edwards, but good stuff. I definitely recommend it. It's interesting to learn about him, so that's what I have seen.
We just have time to do the socials. So on Instagram, we are at 2 Real Cinema Club. Read the blog at 2realcinemaclub.com. Comment on the YouTube channel or email us at 2realcinemaclub@gmail.com. Next time round, what are we watching next time?
Oh my. I didn't know Demi Moore is still making films, and this one's called The Substance.
The Substance. Yes. Looks possibly hilarious, possibly terrifying.
Yeah, or a little of both, which is fine.
And we are comparing it to
John Woo film featuring Nicolas Cage and John Travolta doing some body switching and just making me smile. Face Off.
Face Off.
From 1997.
So 2 body swap movies. How are these going to stack up? I can't wait.
I think they're both going to be fun and great. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be great.
Thanks for joining us as always. We'll see whether we can do a body swap before next week. Join us at the Popcorn Counter next week when we'll talk about I'm not entirely sure, but we'll figure something out. And then back in 2 weeks with more Just engage. You do this. Thanks for joining us as always. We will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.